Jonathan, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
That's lovely. And Richard here, always pleased to have interesting subjects, interesting people. This is really something that needs to be talked about. It's needed to be talked about for a long time, but now we are going to talk about it with someone who really knows what they're doing, and we want to start off a series of these conversations. But Jonathan, it's an interesting aspect working with these ketamine-based, these mind-opening projects and processes. But let's just get you a bit to speed. We've given you a bit of an intro, but tell us about yourself, how you got into this space. It's a really interesting space to be in.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Switzerland, where I worked for the most part in finance for really 20 years of my life. I was working in hedge funds. I built 2 businesses from the ground up. And while I was building that first company, I actually suffered a pretty substantial burnout. And, I really didn't know why it happened. And I really spent a lot of my life suffering from anxiety, from depression, from substance abuse. And about 8 years ago, a friend of mine brought me to have my first ayahuasca ceremony. And I've had like 30 since. I started working with that medicine. I also started working really with a psychiatrist here in New York who really helped me out with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And for the first time in my life, I was actually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from childhood trauma. And finally understanding, what was going on and why I was behaving this way. And so, it was very, very helpful. It was very transformative. I know it's corny to say, but it really changed my life. And, as I began to live a more integrative life, I didn't really feel as much of a connection to the work that I was doing in finance. And so I decided to quit my job in finance, and I went back to school here in New York to study clinical psychology. And so as I was in school, like a funny story is that I actually hadn't finished high school before going to work in finance. So I had to do my GED at the age of 38, which was an interesting experience. And then went back as a bachelor and learned psychology. And then while I was in school, I really felt the need to integrate my background as an entrepreneur and all that business experience that I've had built up to support that mission that I have to bring these medicines responsibly to the world. And so that's how I ended up founding Journey alongside my wife, who's my co-founder and who has her own story, which I'd let her share.
Fantastic! Wow, what a journey!
That's wonderful. Yeah, it is. Journey is a beautiful description, and I mean, I sort of go back. I've had a lot of interest in this since I was a kid too, and quite differently, my sort of journey was very open-minded. I actually started out as an entertainer, as an actor, a musician. Was all about trying to be open and being insufficient at it. But what's interesting, I think, with your story there, as we go and we see, as is so often the case, people going to study because they want to find out something. They've got the interest first. They haven't just sort of, stuck a pin in a page. And this process of sort of learning these technical aspects of the mind and of mental health and so on and so forth, in the balance between your lived experience, and then this coming up, now this really fascinates me, and this is the point I'm leading to. I want to hear a bit more. Suddenly realizing that there was, and we use sort of quote marks, diagnosable, but a describable issue of PTSD. That then, what was the effect of hearing that and getting something that had language to it that you could look at and examine?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that, diagnoses have their uses, and they could also not be useful. It's very situational, I think. For me personally, the hardest part of spending really the majority of my adult life not understanding why I was engaging in certain behavior patterns, which I later understood were essentially really the best that I could come up with as a coping mechanism to cope with my trauma. was really difficult, right? When you're depressed or abusing substances, or just generally like not feeling well, and you have this sort of like ominous part of yourself that you don't really quite understand in the background. It's really anxiety provoking, and I'm sure that other people who suffer from trauma feel the same way. And so, the way it happened for me was that I was working with ayahuasca for quite some time, and I eventually started to not be able to process anymore what was going on in those ceremonies. And I really found myself in a loop, having really, really difficult ceremonies. And I had done a lot of progress in my life, actually. Like, it's pretty amazing, because after a very short period of time working with ayahuasca, my substance abuse completely like resorbed. I also work with harm reduction. I believe that's a good approach to things. And I just couldn't process this, ongoing loop that I kept finding myself in these ceremonies. And so what I found was that actually finding a therapist with whom I formed a therapeutic alliance, who was competent to understand psychedelics and also work well with me. He's got a psychoanalytic approach, actually, was tremendously helpful. And so finally, when we started to understand, or he helped me start to understand what was actually going on, that it wasn't my fault, that I didn't need to carve out this part of myself, but that I was working with defenses that were really strong, and that we could take a psychodynamic approach to it and work together and enter into a different relationship with these various parts or defenses that I have, and start to bring in, self-love and forgiveness to myself. And this is years of practice, right? I also don't believe like that psychedelics are a panacea. I'm a yogi, I'm a meditator, I practice jujitsu, I go to yoga. I think like these are holistic approaches to ourselves. I think in the end, that's how I view things. But working to understand what was going on, like that was really a huge relief for me, actually. And then I think that once you understand it, I think there's always a risk to identify with that very heavily as becoming your identity. And so I think there was understanding it, processing it, making, I guess friends is a good terminology for all these various parts, and becoming essentially a father to myself, and to love myself and care for myself, and, retake leadership in my own system. And then also like moving on from the identity of like, I am traumatized, and kind of like, oh, well, I was traumatized, and I processed that, and it's true, and this happened to me, and that's also in the past. And so I couldn't have done this really without an analyst who was really competent and who I worked with. And so that's also why we created our company this way, within the context of the Therapeutic Alliance, to support that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, we are built to co-regulate and co-exist, and it was a beautiful example of how the form of therapy, the best form of therapy, emerged out of your needs, and out of, I need to understand this. Well, I'm not going to understand that way, this way. Great responsive approach, reactive approach.
Yeah,
Matt, you were.
Yeah, so now, I think that's a good segue now to talk about how you went from, after completing clinical psychology and getting into the field, the journey from there then into the business as it is today. Can you take us on that little journey?
Yeah, for sure. When I started to look at what was the best way to essentially enable mainstream adoption of these treatments, aside from my personal experience, which tremendously influenced the approach that we took, what we really found was that empowering licensed mental health professionals to incorporate these treatments in their practice as an adjunct to therapy, really very much like you would EMDR, was the most scalable, but also the most efficacious way to do it, because of that therapeutic alliance. And so we really started to consider, what was the main barrier to entry for licensed mental health professionals to do it. And it actually is, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I assume it's probably similar. It's forming and maintaining relationships with prescribing physicians. It's really hard to do. And there's also not many of them. I don't know if you know this, but in America, there's only 25,000 psychiatrists in the country. They're mostly in large cities. There's a similar problem with psychiatric nurse practitioners. And so when these relationships exist, they're actually, first of all, they're quite fickle, which is a problem for continuity of care. But also they put a lot of pressure on the cost for the patient, and they limit the potential for a therapist to build out their own business, right? And so what's going on right now is that for the most part, they refer out. And they're referring out to clinics or direct-to-consumer offerings. And I mean, as you both know, it's really hard to find a therapist that you like. It's really hard to build that relationship with this person. And all of a sudden, you're being asked to have what maybe is the most cathartic experience of your life with someone you've never met or bought. And that's just not good. And so what we wanted to build was the necessary infrastructure to enable essentially psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to exist, right? And like, we didn't come up with this alone, like MAPS and Compass Pathways and all these treatment modalities are based around psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy on the premise that therapists can deliver this in their practice, right? And so what we do is that we basically set our members with everything up they need to incorporate, now it's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in their practice. And so that starts with, a telehealth platform where essentially we support a collaborative care model. I think personally that the model of collaborative care is actually the biggest innovation we have today. It's really important. Aside from psychedelics, I think it's really fundamental to having a collaborative approach with therapists, because there's no one that knows more about a patient's mental health than the therapist. And so, the way it works is that people become members of Journey. They refer their patients to our in-house medical team. So we employ like 30 doctors and nurse practitioners that work for us. We take on all of the medical aspects. So we'll take on eligibility and prescriptions and outcome monitoring. And then the therapist will do the ketamine sessions with their patients. And so they can do it in a variety of modalities, from in-person to group to retreats. And we created this purposefully flexible because not everybody needs the same modality. Not every therapist wants to deliver the same modality. And actually, often patients want to have an experience with one modality and maybe try a different modality of this type of treatment. And so being flexible is really important. And then they come back to us regularly for dose adjustment and follow-up consultations. And then the other part of what we do, and this is really, I think, the power of the collaborative care model, is that we basically become their in-house doctor. And so we're there for them 24/7. So when, an adverse event happens, they can just text our emergency number and we'll be there to support the therapist and the patients and, try to resolve that situation in a way that's positive. But we're also there on an ongoing basis with them. And so what that allows us to do is actually build out bespoke treatment plans at scale, right? So we're basically concierge mental health at scale. And that's, I think, really important to understand, because no one has a one-size-fits-all treatment. It doesn't exist. I personally don't believe in it. So when people tell you that they're doing 6 ketamine sessions a month and that's it, it's just not true. Like, everybody has a different need, has a different frequency of needs, have different dosing needs. If someone's very traumatized, they might need a higher dose, then they might need a lower dose if they get better. And so ongoing care is the way to bring the standard of care up. And the best way to do that is to collaborate with a therapist. So basically, they're getting access to a world-class medical team, just like if they worked for a hospital, but by being members of Journey. And then the other part, it's all tech enabled. So we have a portal for our prescribers. We have a portal for the therapists where there's training. We have a 22 module training on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. They have peer consultation groups and a lot of peer-to-peer dynamics. They can have a ketamine experience through us with other Journey members. We help them with legal resources and even marketing, because I know it's not easy to build a business. We help them do that, and it's all HIPAA compliant, so they can refer the patients through the portal. They can track their patients' progress, and then there's a patient portal. And so we launched that in 2021. When we opened it up for membership, we had 30 members. At the end of February last year, we now have about 730 members in our network. We've seen more than 1,400 patients. So it's been a really interesting journey to build that out, starting with a small group of people who really gave us all these amazing insights, and growing with them and seeing this amazing community of people. And I think that another thing that we really provide is community to people. And I'm sure that your listeners know, but I'm not sure everybody understands the importance of community for a therapist. It's a lonely job, right? I mean, people are mostly on Zoom or with a patient on a one-on-one basis. And so having access to a community of people that are there for you, that understand what you're doing, that can support you, is like a tremendous value. So we put a lot of stake into that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And just a quick one on, as I'm catching there. So I'm a member, I've become a member of Journey. I'm still working in my office with my clients in my space. Is that correct? But what I'm doing 100%. Is I'm linking into what I just put down, a coordinating environment. Is that sounds okay?
Yeah, exactly. Like you can do it in your office, you can do it on Zoom with your patients, whatever modality works for you. But we basically become your backend. It's almost like you hired a whole medical team and training team and community, and we just take on that lift for you. You continue giving therapy, but now you can incorporate psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in your practice.
Wow. And, psychedelics being the focus, but I can imagine, like for myself, a whole range of other services that I would need in terms of, other different medical, advice and intervention, even down to simple, blood tests, because,
Sure.
I'm not sure what it's like in America, but in Australia, there's the whole range of blood tests which come under Medicare. There's some that are outside that scope. But generally, if you're working with a naturopath, you need to get a GP, medical doctor to do the blood tests.
Yeah, so this coordinating process, and particularly America, which has got a combination of diffracted services, which all have separate systems of access and charging, and this connection. And I must admit, Jonathan, I've got some issues and difficulties in our family. We have some cancer that's come into the story.
I'm sorry to hear that.
There's but we're doing real well. But there's like a whole team of people. There's the specialists for all kinds of areas, and it's really important. And they all come together sort of under one roof. And that's what I really like about this story that you're telling here, so that I, as a therapist, know that I think, I think this is outside of my my purview, outside of my skills. Oh no, it's not. I'm connected to all the skills, and this is something we've forgotten in our competitive, dog eat dog, set yourself up independently. Human beings come in with all the issues, and we can't isolate the practices. So this is fabulous. I'm a bit blown over.
But when we do have an integrative kind of perspective, it's still really difficult. I know, my own personal experience, it's really difficult to find the right GPs, the right other specialists to team up with. And even when you do, there's still difficulties in, or they're booked out, I can't get my client in to see them. And then you have to make other sort of relationships, and that's often difficulty. There's a difficulty there, and you've obviously solved this problem. You're a one-stop shop for all of these connections.
It's also thank you. It's also, completely unreasonable to have this in such a disjointed manner, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you go work with someone that's not connecting to your therapist who knows everything about you? Like, it makes absolutely no sense that you're seeing someone every week who has probably unparalleled insight on how you're doing with your treatment, how it's impacting it, and then you're seeing someone who's not really communicating with this person and who's just giving them essentially medication for them to take, right? That's very odd. And so for us, we frankly believe that we can become the hub for collaborative care in America. That's our objective, and expand maybe beyond ketamine. And so, there's really a lot of opportunity for us to build that out. I think, to be honest, the ketamine is a tool. I think the power of our model is the collaborative care. And that's why we chose very, very intentionally to have the therapist as our primary customer, because by supporting their practice, I don't know if I said this, but there's 40 million people in America in therapy right today. It's a huge population of people. And so this is it for us. This is how you make this mainstream. It's by having that population who's the best equipped to deliver these treatments incorporated as an adjunct to therapy. And something else. Oh, sorry.
No. Please go on.
Yeah. Something else that people like therapists forget is that, and that's why we chose to work with licensed mental health professionals, not coaches, not massage therapists. Not that they're not good. There's some amazing people out there who are really qualified and do amazing work, but we chose to do it because, first of all, there's someone who answers to a license, but also, as someone who's been to study psychology, like you're basically equipped to do this. Like, you are equipped to help someone process cathartic emotions and work through them. And so some of the wonderful stories that we've heard is that I've been with a patient who has been blocked for so long and there's been no progress. And all of a sudden, in a few sessions, this really unlocked all this work that we've been doing together. And people forget that therapist burnout is a real thing. And therapist burnout really comes maybe from a lot of working hours, but also from working with patients who are not progressing.
And I think it's really, see, there's two things, sort of comment, and then I want to sort of take a little bit of a different direction that based on something you said. But this idea in therapy, the one that I'm sort of following a lot, is this idea that the client is telling you stuff. The experience, the therapeutic experience is telling you something. And when someone remains blocked, the idea is not to try and bash their heads against the brick wall, but to say, okay, what is this blocking telling me? Where do we need to go? And, here's a wonderful possibility. This is a wonderful option to even test. But in saying that, we were saying ketamine is not a medication, it's a tool. So can we talk a little bit about the tool? What is the, what does happen? I mean, you've had the experience, but for those who haven't, what is the experience of that ketamine allows the person to have in order to make this progress?
Yeah, sure. So, first maybe starting with sort of like the neurological impact of ketamine on the brain, right? And to keep it very high level, ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. It's been FDA approved since 1970. It's on the WHO list of top 10 medications to have, so it's very common. And it's been more recently used to treat depression and anxiety. Actually, historically, a person called Evgeny Kripetsky in Russia was using it to treat alcohol addiction, and then this got transferred to the US by a guy called Eli Kulp, and then it's actually frequently used in hospitals for treating people who are highly suicidal. They'll give you a shot of ketamine. And just at a neurological level, what's going on is that there's a theory called the glutamate theory of depression, where essentially if you have poor pure regulation of glutamate in your central nervous system. That's one of the physiological causes of ketamine. And so what ketamine does is that it's an antagonist to the neuroreceptor that receives glutamate. And so what antagonism means is that it kind of acts as a lock, right? And so that neuroreceptor is then locked. And what that causes is reabsorption of the neurotransmitter, which regulates that in your brain. So that's a lot of like scientific stuff. But what that does,
that's great. That's great.
Actually, is that in a lot of studies, people who have high degrees of suicidality and were not respondent to treatments with treatments, mostly a lot of the studies are done on intravenous ketamine, within 24 hours, like you get like 50% that respond. And like if you take the outliers up, you go up to like 70%. It's really, really powerful, very fast acting, and very low risk. And so that's what happens from essentially a physiological, neurological standpoint. So a lot of the ketamine clinics that popped up in the beginning were mostly like IV infusion clinics where people would go and get an infusion, and they're run by anesthesiologists or emergency doctors. And, they would basically put you in a chair and, give you like a 90-minute infusion and then send you on your way. And they have this course of like, 6 treatments in 2 weeks, based on Eli Kolb's treatment, actually, and then come back for boosters. But what they were doing, and this has evolved in some cases, there are some much more psychedelically informed infusion clinics now, here in the US at least, was that they were completely ignoring what they called the dissociation. For them, the dissociation was just a side effect of the medication that could even be negative and should be ignored. So, and it's not their fault, right? You're talking to an anesthesiologist, you're talking to an emergency doctor or a pain doctor. And so these people's perspective and purview is that, medication is the way to treat essentially a physiological problem, right? But the problem is that you had people sitting in those chairs going through what is an ego death or a massive psychedelic experience under ketamine and absolutely not knowing what to do with it. Like they were just completely lost with this tremendous experience and having no one to help them integrate. And so that's, for example, why we work with people who follow the same process as what they do at MAPS or at other psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy treatments, which is to have preparation, dosing, and integration work. And that 3-step approach is really, really important for a number of reasons, right? First of all, preparation is very important because, what people think preparation is not necessarily what it is. Like people think preparation and they think, oh, I'm going to set my intentions and I'm going to write them on a piece of paper and I'm going to go have this experience. I'm going to work on this stuff. And what happens really often is that people do that and then they feel like they failed their psychedelic experience because they're like, oh, wow, I didn't really work on this and I didn't succeed in having a breakthrough experience. And maybe I should have taken more and I'm such a failure. And
expectation is the death of creativity. And just quickly, right. I know you've started on that first one. Yeah. But this is the model that we've been using for a long time. Right. You figure out the process, you figure out the way in which the process can be achieved, the method that you're going to do. Then you go and you have the process, then you are all cured. And of course, what we're learning is that that's not the case at all, because we're a complex system. All kinds of different things emerge. And it's been able to deal with that. And it's actually, when we talk about dissociation, you're just highlighting that thing we've done with our medical systems and our mental health systems, is we've dissociated the physiology from the mental biology. So the physical 100%. Biology from the mental biology, and that has been to our peril. And I think that a large amount of the expansive unsuccessful progress of psychotherapy and of behavioral therapy is because of this disconnection. And so ketamine, interestingly, in its disconnected frame of just being used as a medicine, has actually opened up a connecting doorway.
It really has. That's such a great way to
Yeah.
put it. 100%. Yeah. That all of a sudden happened. All these people were there having these experiences, and then they started to need to find integration therapists who were working with them to help them integrate. So that's why we brought it all in one house and made it holistic. Yeah. But it's so to answer your question, like, what does it feel like? I mean, what are psychedelics, right? Psychedelics are defense lowering like they're non-specific amplifiers who help lower defenses. Defenses are what we develop when we're in our early childhood to cope with various situations that are unbearable for us. And those defenses can be stronger or less stronger, depending on if you're traumatized or not. And so these defenses tend to take different forms that can be healthier and healthier in life. And so, that's the opportunity with psychedelics, I think. To be able to work on that. But another thing that's really important, I think, is the set and the setting in which you do that. Just for those who don't understand what that means, set is your mindset and the setting in which you're doing it. And it doesn't have to be in a doctor's office or in a ceremonial. It could be at home with your therapist on Zoom and creating a space where you're feeling well and you've got a chaperone and you're making sure that no one's running in the door while you're doing that. But slipping into a space like you do when you practice yoga or you meditate, and getting into a certain mindset and an openness and making room for that in your life really influences it. And so that'll drive your experience. But again, they're not a panacea and they don't always go in a direction you think they will. And so having intentionality and structure with someone who is helping you prepare. And again, just to come back on that preparation point, it's actually like, there's a lot of this transference to psychedelics, right? This transference in everything, this transference to the therapist, but there's also transference to the medicine itself. And so working on adjusting that transference to essentially maybe bringing mindful attention to whatever's going on, and then bringing that into integration, that's what we found, and not just us, but many have found to be and studied to be successful.
It sounds like a steep learning curve. I'm just imagining all of the different variables that are involved here. And can you just let us know what is it like when you first, as a therapist, and you're first starting to to use these therapies? What is the learning curve like?
Because also knowing that I'm seeing courses and various things appearing, and we've got to be sure of the reliability of those too.
Maps are making a big noise at the moment. Every therapist, I'm sure, has seen their conference coming up and all of this. So so sorry, tell us the learning curve for a therapist.
Yeah, so it's interestingly enough, it's not a steep learning curve, and that's why you would think it's a steep learning curve, but it's actually not, because you go to school for all these years and you spend all those times in training and practice working with patients. And so actually therapists are already completely equipped to deal with preparing someone. Like, here's an example, right? You're going to go, you're a traumatized patient, and you're going to go have dinner with your family, and that's highly activating, and that's going to be an experience that in itself is probably psychedelic, right? Because that's what it means. It's mind manifesting. And so how to prepare your patients to be with that experience and recognize the mechanisms that come up. You go, you have that dinner, and then you come back and you process it with your therapist. Like, you've been trained for years to take care of this. What the learning curve happens is like working with these medicines, and that's it. Training is important. So that's why we have a whole training module and education that goes into that. They have to take it before they can work with us. And there are some great training centers out there that do a lot of great stuff. But actually, like, the base tools that you already have them. This is more of an add-on. And so what we found was that once they do the training, we have a lot of experiential learning. Like, we give people the ability to have a CAP session with other Journey members. We have peer consultation groups. They have a lot of support working with us. But it's about, I think, learning the sort of like the basics. Like, the didactic training is pretty much the same everywhere, and then having experiential learning, and then gaining confidence within yourselves that you can do this. Like, honestly, because I don't know if you've ever watched someone do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, but it can be kind of boring. Like, I mean, like someone puts their eye mask on, they put music on, and they're gone for like 2.5 hours. hours or something, or 8 hours if you're doing MDMA. Like those MAPS videos are really boring, right? Like people are there and they're just like, it's
I really understand it. In fact, one of the methods I use is sort of it's a psychedelic, or it's a sort of a mental thing. The best thing you can do is just shut up and get out of the way and leave the client to do their work. But I as you're sitting, I'm just thinking, of course, what ketamine is doing, as is quite a few other different therapies that we use, but ketamine's doing it in a particular way, and other psychedelics are doing that. It's the door opener. And I was just thinking, as you were talking, so yeah, the door opens, the client says, I'm thinking, I'm feeling, I'm realizing, and yeah, sure, I'm trained to do that. And the training I'm just visualizing is what I need to know is to who and how to trust that team of people I'm putting behind me. Now that we don't learn in graduate school, that you can actually work in a team. So that's the wonderful aspect. I don't need to know about how ketamine works necessarily. I need to, out of my interest, I need to know that I have a team behind me, that when I have that question, I can immediately go to my medical expert who'll tell me this, and my organizing expert, and so on and so forth.
I think that's partially true. Like you do need to do the training, like understanding what these compounds are doing, like, and how they work, and how your patient might react, and how to work with preparation and how to work with integration is important. And like, so doing that is I think really essential to sort of like delivering a good standard of care, right? Because like, what is preparation, how to explain it to your patient, how to hold space, how maybe not to interrupt your patient when they're having an experience, but holding space for them, and then working on integration with them. But what I'm saying is that it sounds like, a steep learning curve, but it's not. Like when you actually have access to the right amount of education, the right support, and support is not just our medical team, because like our medical team give a lot of support. Like we have a weekly meet the medical team meeting where they can go and ask questions, but also support with peers or experiential learning with other members. We have a lot of like peer-to-peer dynamics in our network that really like enables you very, very quickly to get started. So we've had therapists who are complete novices with psychedelics, got started with journey and built entire practices very successfully. And so we're really there to give them all the support they need on every aspect, from like medical to legal to modality wise. We do like webinars. We just did one which was really awesome with Sunny Strasbourg on IFS and ketamine, and it's a really cool modality that works really well with psychedelics. I don't know how familiar you guys are with it.
Yeah, that's internal family systems. Just
exactly. Yeah, which is really great, right? Because you can sort of like build an internal dialogue within that context and sort of like name it and frame it and the integration work. And so there's so much to do. There's so many modalities you can use. And so when I say also you're already trained, some people want IFS, but you could totally use object relations as a really great modality to talk to all the integrated relationships, internalized relationships that you have in your life. So it's it's a great support tool for what you already know. And I think that's really important to remind like therapists, is that they're really already really well equipped to do this.
Oh, that's great. That beautifully corrected or added and expanded what I was getting a bit focused there. Beautiful. Thanks for clarifying that.
For sure.
Yeah. This is not a conversation for today. I was just wondering how this might fit in with memory reconsolidation. Random sidebar thought. Well,
there's more neuroscience. Yes. There's more explanations of the processes to be discovered now that it is being utilized in a productive and functional and sort of an organized way. I mean, certainly we've been having all these things. I mean, although I must admit, I was talking to my daughter the other day and she's saying, "Oh no, Dad, this has been really, really great." And I'm thinking, we're an open family, aren't we? When I was young and I do these things. But it was interesting, as I was saying before, I was an actor and a writer, and I actually, there were a few mind-opening substances I took as a youngster, and I actually found my own head was pretty out there anyway. So there's differences between individuals about what you're releasing. And because I used to I was a writer, do film script writing, and I always had to be careful not to be thinking about a film I was writing or a script I was writing, because my windscreen would turn into the film and I'd be doing, and I always had to pull over. But people have these experiences, and it's just as you were saying, Jonathan. They go to a triggering sort of experience like a family dinner. They go out and they have an extraordinary experience with their partner, a mind-altering sort of experience, and we deal with that. And this is just another way in a world that spends a lot of time closing us down. And I think this is something we have to acknowledge. I often describe but as like we talk about an obesogenic society, or society, the culture that makes us fat, but we also have a mental illness agenic society. There's a lot of things that make us lead us towards needing something to open ourselves up, and this sounds like a fantastic mechanism.
I mean, look, the number one healthcare crisis in the world today, it's not cancer, it's not obesity, it's mental health. That's it. That's the number one healthcare crisis that we're all facing today. And so we need all the help we can get. We need innovation. There hasn't been innovation in the past 50 years in this field. It was antiquated, and it's time, and that now is the time. And we're very excited to be at the forefront of that.
Well, it's very exciting, and it takes an entrepreneur like yourself, I think, to bring such innovation. And this journey platform that you've got, it sounds revolutionary. We will be pointing everybody to the appropriate URLs so they can go and check it out themselves.
Thanks.
But Jonathan, as we sort of wrap up today, is there any sort of final words you would like to leave our listeners with?
I think that mostly we're so lucky to work with such amazing therapists that are, at the forefront of mental health, that are bringing this together, to be partnered with them and to be partnered with more and more of them every day. Our network is always growing, and to see these amazing results and their encouraging feedback to building this together. It's been maybe the most beautiful work I've had in my life. And I'm so grateful to be able to do that every day. And to, sometimes when you're building a company, you get very in the weeds about very operational stuff, and so I get to we do something every week. We have an open house with our therapist where I hop on, and my co-founder does, and it's always the highlight of my week, where we get a chance to hear what they're doing, what problems they're seeing, how we can help them. And so I'm just very grateful that they're doing such amazing work. I think people don't know how hard that job is, to carry that and hold space for people. And so, we're just grateful to be of service.
Bravo. Yeah, wonderful. Well, we'll wrap up now with those beautiful words. I know we could talk on this more, and we will try and do more, and we'll try and have more aspects coming in. But Jonathan, we just want to thank you so much for giving us your time and telling us about the journey, both the business and the thing that is happening in lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was lots of fun.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.